ignorant and mistaken, do you guys feel as though it's a disservice for people that desire to be alone and not be with somebody? Like, do you guys have that same idea that Biz have with that, or do you think it's okay for people to be alone and be happy? Or do you think it's our duty to be with somebody that we put on this earth and it's our purpose to multiply and to experience life with others?
I personally think that if you want to be alone, you can be alone. I don't think anything is wrong with that. I think that marriage is if you can't withhold sexually, then you need to get married. The problem is people are not just alone; they are involving people into their. I'm sorry. I do apologize. um, my weekend. But so I think the problem is when people involve other people into whatever they've got going on because people aren't necessarily just alone. And I think one of the questions that was said earlier, how do we know what's right and what's wrong? Usually what's wrong comes with some type of consequence, right? We may not see it immediately, but if you're doing things that are wrong, there are consequences that are usually associated with it. It could be like, okay, when you were talking about, situationship, it could be STDs, it could be unwanted pregnancy. Right now, you got rift in your household because the mom and dad don't get along with each other. The kid doesn't excel because both parents are in the household. There's usually a consequence. What I've seen when you do things that are out of order or not right, it may not be like a bold in your face consequence, but there's something that comes along with not doing things right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but I think consequence it doesn't necessarily mean bad, right? Because you can have good consequences. I just think when no matter what we do, we still like
What I'm
there's an outcome. Go ahead.
what I'm saying is whenever you're doing something bad, there's a because you can have consequences when you're doing something. So for example, if you're sitting here saying, okay, to be lonely, I don't think there's anything wrong with being lonely. That could be just how you roll, right? There's no consequence besides you by yourself. But let's just say you want to be a player. The more you play, the higher your chances of getting played in some type of way, whether it be through disease, the more you play,
Hmm.
you're trying to find out. You know what I'm saying? So I think that, or it could just be simply you're not as successful as you could be. It could be like, okay, I'm putting all this energy in looking at the women, but I'm falling behind economically because I'm putting all my energy into who's next on the roster. That's where my energy is going. So it could look something like that. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree with you. I probably would have worded it a little differently. Just me, I probably would have said that just be mindful of what you're doing when you're trying to produce the outcome that you desire. So if you want to be, if you don't want to be alone, then you probably want to get out. Like some people think things are going to fall into their lap or they're going to pray it to them. I do believe that you have to do some type of work, right? And so if you want that outcome, then you're going to have to do something that aligns with it. I think Sweeney made a point because Sweeney said he's going to stop speaking to a lot of folks who are trying to tell him what to do because people are going to do what they want to do, but just don't complain about it. I think he gets irritated when people complain about things that they want, but they're not doing the work. So
I think that I was answering something totally different. I think that I thought in the midst of you speaking, you were saying, how do we know when something is right and when something is wrong? So
mhm,
that's the part I was answering. But I agree everything that you're saying about, if you want something, you got to make it happen. You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
I
yeah,
was just particularly talking about that part, right?
yeah. Something that was interesting on this past King Talk again. If you guys haven't checked it out, I strongly suggest you guys go ahead and get the context before this next conversation that we have on Tuesday. But um, there are some people who don't believe in the Bible, but they seem to follow the principles. And so I think a lot of people, whether they realize it or not, they're still aligning with those principles. Now, whether they want to seek it and get the information from it, it doesn't change what I'm saying right now. Like you guys are still following it. And like what keeps you in check? So when you do get married, what keeps you from cheating? And when you do get married, like, where does the expectation of your wife not going outside of marriage, where does that come from? So it just kind of makes you think a little bit deeper, like where do we get right and wrong from? What did our parents, if you say, well, this is the way my mom and my father did, well, where did they get it from? There's always a root to why things happening. When you see somebody yelling, um, cursing you out, there's a root to it. I try not to take things personally. I just had this conversation a couple of days ago. When I see people just acting a certain way, I take a step back and I don't initially respond to it because I say this person must be struggling with something because this is outside of the norm. And I think it's okay to have a baseline of how things operate earthly. And I think there's a baseline of how things operate above us. So just being able to understand the two dynamics of it, because were a lot of things that's happening here is because it's as a result of what people are doing, how things are changing. It's going to always be that way. But I still think you have to understand that these things are happening. You just like talking to people and they don't even realize that there's anything wrong with what they're doing. So when you talk to somebody about being single and there's a consequence, they don't look at it as a consequence. They're looking at it as though this is I'm getting what it is that I want. They don't look at it. Probably not making sense, but hopefully you guys can get it, man. I'm gonna let somebody else.
We get what you're saying.
I think it's again goes back to what you were saying about outcome. Like sometimes people are alone, but not make the connection that the reason you're alone is because you're not making the adjustments that you need in order to build relationship. They're accepting a situation as well. I'm supposed to be alone, like I'm good, right? But the right and wrong ideology is exactly kind of what I agree with what you and Shan was saying, is that that's going to determine what's right or wrong. Is the is it aligning with the outcome you want, right? So and and again, I think right and wrong could also be subjective because everybody's idea of what they want their outcome to be can be different, right? So you have somebody that could be a drug dealer, right? And they're trying to get at that money. The outcome is they're getting at that money. So for them, that outcome might be right, right? But from somebody else who understands oh, that's illegal, you shouldn't be doing it, they're going to judge that as wrong. So it all, I guess, can be subjective in how you look at it, right? But I do think that that's where most of us, like when we're talking about relationship, I think what he was also talking about too is the difference between just rules. Like with religion, we're focused on the rules and maybe not necessarily the relationship. Is that when people are coming together to build relationships, a lot of times in these conversations I'm hearing, we're always hearing about the rules of what we want the other person to do, right? Oh, as a man, my lady, she better be submissive. She better, be able to cook. She better be, all of those things, right? We'll say those are the rules or the roles, right? And as a woman, oh, I want him to, he better make six figures or whatever those things are, right? But none of those things have anything to do with relationship, like building on a relationship that's going to truly set a firm foundation to build a healthy relationship. Because in any of those things that we're talking about with the rules are always going to be broken at some point. It may not be all the rules. It might be a rule this time or that time. But if you're not building on the relationship part, it's hard to move forward when all the rules are, or when you feel that the rules are broken. And I think that's kind of how the purpose, I guess, even if you're not religious, um, but you understand like the concept of Christianity, is that is kind of what God gets at. Like there are rules, there are expectations that he have of us, but there's also the expectation that he knows we're not perfect and we're going to break the rules or we're going to fall short. But then there's the relationship that you have with him that will always put you back in the position to say, I'm going to continue to move forward to do better. But I don't think we give each other that grace because we don't focus on building that kind of relationship with each other. We just want our needs met or our rules to be adhered to.